My name is Katie Schermbeck, and these are my responses to the video interview questions. I want to lead others in a school because I feel as though it's going to allow me to use all of my strengths at their largest and greatest capacities, as I think that leading a school is one of the hardest and toughest things that you could possibly do. However, more than that, I believe that the strength of a well-equipped community is really what is going to provide change, especially in rural areas. I think in order for us to really see those changes taking place, the role of the school is moving more toward being a hub for community resources, essentially a way to concentrate community resources in a more accessible way for families. But I guess larger than this and kind of like big idea, I think that education is one of the most powerful gifts that any person can pursue and can ultimately receive for themselves. Education is my passion and where I see myself long term, and I think as the role of our schools continues to shift and grow, I really want to be a part of ushering that new movement to help develop new ways of thinking in schools and around schools and just how we perceive them as communities. In my search for career opportunities, which I feel like has been a long-lasting pursuit, I found myself initially drawn to education due to the impact that I know that it has, and that I've seen that it has on individual lives, which is truly what led me to join TFA. However, since completing my time in the classroom, I've seen that existing models of schools don't provide the resources needed for families to see change, that maybe individual students can see change and they can affect, hopefully, their families from there on out, but the family itself in its current place doesn't see the same change that a student might. So because of that, I went out to seek careers in the nonprofit sector in order to be the person that's providing those family resources. But from there, I see myself circling back to schools, because if schools are failing or if students aren't receiving the education that they need, then those resources aren't going to mean as much, and then we're not going to see the full cycle change that we're looking for. So I think in order to see change occur at a family and a larger level, the school and other support resources have to be strong and have to be available. So I feel as though leading people in a school with my mindsets that I have about education and also my experience in the nonprofit sector is going to allow me to really connect people to lots of different things. I currently work in a rural area in the Piedmont of North Carolina, and I am continually realizing how blind I was before to the dire needs that exist in rural areas. And so I really feel called to be in a rural region because of my experience that I've had the last 6 to 7 months. I did my core commitment in Charlotte, which is an urban setting, and I expected the challenges that I would see in my current role to be really similar than they were, just simply due to lack of financial resources, which was a gross generalization and really naive on my part, because while some of these issues are similar at their core, such as low income levels and lack of education and really a lot of strained family structures, there are so many that separate them. And the one that I feel like I'm really passionate about and kind of fuels my want to be in a rural area is just a lack of an informed worldview. I currently work with kindergarten through 5th grade students, and just the lack of diversity that they're exposed to is really troubling. And I mean diversity as far as like lack of cultures, lack of ideas, professions that they have access to, even just talents that they want to pursue or interests that they might have. They're all kind of stagnant because they do not have the exposure that they need in order to fully develop. And for a lot of my students, even being as young as they are, this is the only demographic, this is the only type of landscape, this is the only true way of life that they've seen, and this is all that they know. Their lens is incredibly small. And part of that is just their age, that they need to have time to develop. But even in speaking with their parents and learning more about their histories, this is all that they know. And there's not very many people around them that are really encouraging them to dream a lot bigger than what's around them. And I'm not saying this to focus on encouraging my students to leave and explore like a bigger or better world that's out there, because I don't necessarily think that that's true or healthy, but just to invest them in bigger ideas that are around them. and to introduce them to larger world issues that I want them to have a hand in solving in. So that's really the core of why I'm really passionate about being in a rural community versus somewhere else. Lastly, just to explain the 4 words about me. First of all, I think the word that my principal would use to describe me is relentless, which I think is kind of a blessing and a curse, that it speaks to my passion, my dedication, but also to some of my faults of being a little bit naive and stubborn. My principal and I had a really good but somewhat strained relationship because I just continually sought to push what we were doing at our school and to just not really be satisfied. I think that's kind of my natural state, is to not be satisfied with things, which I think a lot of times does push me forward, but I've found that I also have to keep myself in check of making sure that I can celebrate positive growth. So I think that's a really important perspective to have too. Therefore, with my principal, I found myself in my 2nd year being on the school leadership team and working with him really closely to continue developing our school. And whenever ideas were presented in those meetings, or whenever I was meeting with him personally, I always pushed to know more and to ask a lot of questions and wanted to become involved, which I think he lovingly enjoyed, but also he knew where those questions were going to come from, and he knew that I was going to always push him, so I think he would describe me as relentless. If you could speak with my janitors, which I wish that you were able to, I think they would describe me as personable. The relationships that I built with the custodial staff were some of the best relationships that I had at my school, in part because it was mainly because we wanted to have those relationships. They weren't forced, but truthfully, because out of all the adults that I interacted with over the course of the day, I probably saw them the most and shared the most about my life. Just because of the context that we would talk to each other, that it would be either really early in the mornings or really late in the afternoons or the evenings. And we would talk about our families and our weekend plans and just how each other's days were. And so the core of our relationship was about getting to know someone as a person and not necessarily as a teacher or as a part of a school staff. So I feel like I was really able to interact with them honestly, and I wanted to get to know them honestly. So I think they would all describe me as someone that was really personable and that was really interested in their lives. If you could speak to any of my wonderful colleagues, I think that they would describe me as being encouraging. I think that truthful and honest encouragement is one of my absolute greatest joys. I love to lift others up and remind them of just everything that's good that's around them and what's good within them too. And I want them to constantly know that I am someone that is supporting them. I don't want them to ever go a second with any doubt in their minds that I'm not behind them or that I'm not a part of their team. I think this is due to the fact that I feel like I have a really high emotional intelligence, and I can usually read people really well, especially in times of stress. And so I seek to ask a lot of questions and to really get to the heart of things and then to encourage them from there. I think I'm very perceptive, and with the encouragement that I offer, I want it to be truthful. I think one of the most harmful things that you can do is to offer empty encouragement, because that just puts blocks on your relationship and what true encouragement can look like in the future. And so I feel like that's something that I really always try to do, and that is a natural strength of mine as well. Lastly, if you could speak with any of my students' families or parents, I think the word that they would choose to describe me is knowledgeable. While I was teaching high school, a lot of my parent communication had to do with college or career prep, so I was working with mainly sophomores and juniors in high school. And because of that, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of research about specific schools, career paths, testing scores, and how to fill out FAFSA, and lots of things that my parents and families maybe didn't have as much access or experience with that I did. So I think because of that, a lot of our conversations were geared toward how to support your student or your child in the next year or 2 years of high school, so that they would be on their desired path. So I think I showed them that I was very knowledgeable, but I worked very hard to be knowledgeable, that this wasn't information that necessarily came to me naturally, that I knew offhand, but I also worked really hard to present myself as being knowledgeable, and to constantly work at that. Part of this was all of that information that I worked really hard to gain, but part of it is just my experience that I had graduated from high school and from college, and so I knew just a better starting point to have on some of these conversations, or even just where to look. Something as simple as figuring out how to navigate a university website and make sure that you're looking at the admissions and the correct year, and kind of smaller things, but really made a difference in the conversations that I had with parents and families. And in my role now, I work even more closely with families, and I think that they would describe me in the same way. A lot of my conversations that I have with parents and families have to do with supporting their student in school and just informing them about strengths and weaknesses that I'm able to see at program that they're maybe not able to see as much at home. And that ranges from like academic achievement to their social and emotional development that I work with them. And so a lot of times parents are seeking out ideas and strategies to help their students with. And again, those range from like math facts and fluency to anger management and how they're able to have a patient and calm conversation with their child. And I'm not an expert in either. I was an English teacher, and I don't have any formal counseling training, but I feel like I, again, work really hard to be knowledgeable or to connect my parents and families to people that are experts in these areas. And so I think that my parents still, even though the context and the age is different, they would still describe me as knowledgeable, because that's something that I work really hard to be an asset and to be a resource to my families. I think that all of these words are accurate descriptions of me. I can absolutely not hide who I am, and especially my emotions, and when I'm upset about things, I'm upset, and when I am excited about things, I'm excited. And so I feel like when anyone meets me, they have a really correct impression of me, and they get to see who I am as a person, because that's not something that I try to hide from anyone. Thank you so much for your consideration for this fellowship. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to view my answers and to look over things and just try to get to know me more as an applicant. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks.